The viewport on observation deck 7 had a maintenance tag on it. Hairline fracture, northwest quadrant, scheduled for replacement during the next refit cycle. Sub-Commander Vaelen had noted this in his first week aboard the Transcendence, along with the fact that the deck's climate controls ran 2 degrees warmer than specification, and that the third overhead fixture pulsed at irregular intervals. He noted things. It was, at 23 cycles, the only skill that had earned him a command tier post this early, and he suspected his superiors had mistaken thoroughness for competence. The bombardment of Outpost Cassera 9 concluded at 14:37 station time. Vaelen logged the ordnance expenditure, cross-referenced it against the pre-approved allocation, and found a 0.3% deviation he would need to annotate. Below the ship, through that cracked viewport, a settlement that had housed 400 civilians was settling into dust. He was composing the annotation when Senior Technician Draylus said, very quietly, that the thermals were wrong. "I'll be honest with you." What Vaelen saw next changed everything the collective thought it knew about humans, and it started with a number on a screen. Draylus pulled the scan data to the main display. 1 signature, localized electromagnetic output, active, in the center of a bombardment zone that should have been thermally flat. Residual ordnance? Vaelen asked. Negative. Dralyus's 4 eyes cycled through their focus sequence, which they did involuntarily when processing contradictory data, each eye locking and unlocking at a different speed. The biological equivalent of a system running 4 diagnostic threads simultaneously. The signature is coherent, patterned. Sub-Commander, it is generating a field, which meant the readings were wrong, or the bombardment had failed to neutralize the target area, or something in that rubble was still running a power source after absorbing 6 minutes of orbital-grade ordnance. Vaelen requested clarification from the Ordnance Division. The Ordnance Division confirmed full payload delivery. He requested clarification again. They confirmed again with slightly more impatience. He noticed the maintenance tag fluttering on the cracked viewport, caught by a vent current, and for 3 full seconds he focused entirely on that small rectangle of adhesive paper instead of the impossible number on his display. The temperature on the bridge dropped 3 degrees. Not the climate controls. Vaelen checked. The environmental systems were nominal. The cold was coming from the crew. Varian collective physiology synchronizes under threat. Metabolic rates drop. Scales tighten. Ambient body heat decreases across every individual simultaneously. 47 officers on Deck 7, and not one of them had consciously decided to be afraid. Their bodies had voted without them. "Deploy a ground assessment team," Vaelen ordered. His voice was steady. His scales had lost approximately 12% of their reflective sheen in the last 90 seconds, which he knew because Draylus was staring at him. And Draylus only stared when data was visible on a surface. "We brought snacks," said Lieutenant Morin from the deployment bay, because Morin said things like that. "This won't take long." It took long. The ground team's feeds came through in overlapping streams, helmet cameras bouncing through particulate haze. Vaelen monitored from Deck 7, 4 eyes splitting across 4 data channels the way his instructors at the academy had trained him to. Though his instructors had never covered a scenario where the data on all 4 channels was the same impossible reading repeated 4 times, the electromagnetic signature was not residual. It was not a weapon. It was not infrastructure. It was biological. Vaelen had submitted his transfer request to Cultural Studies 11 days before this deployment. He listed his reasons as professional development and expanded xenological competency, which were polite ways of saying he found weapons systems boring and wanted to study alien communication patterns. That request was sitting in an administrative queue somewhere, waiting for a supervisor's approval. And he thought about it now because thinking about administrative paperwork was easier than thinking about what biological electromagnetic signature meant in a bombardment zone where nothing biological should still. The feed from Team Lead Sorath cut through. "Sub-Commander, we need you to see this." Sorath's helmet camera stabilized. The dust had settled enough for visual confirmation, and Vaelen watched from Deck 7 as the feed resolved into recognizable geometry. collapsed support beams, fused ground plating, the carbonized remnants of what the pre-bombardment survey had classified as residential infrastructure. At the center of the debris field, sitting on a slab of foundation that had somehow remained level, was a human child. Small, Vaelen's reference database estimated the age at 5 or 6 solar cycles. The child's legs were crossed, its hands rested on its knees. Around its torso, extending from collar to waist in overlapping segments, a material Vaelen had never seen pulsed with a faint rhythmic charge. "Sub-Commander," Drayla said from across the deck. All 4 eyes locked on the same feed for the first time since Vaelen had known her. The electromagnetic signature. "It's the clothing, not clothing." Vaelen pulled the spectral analysis and read it twice, then a third time because the first 2 readings looked like calibration errors. Adaptive reactive plating. Electromagnetic armor designed for charge plate energy dispersal. The kind of technology the Varian military had theorized about for decades but never successfully miniaturized. The humans had miniaturized it. They had miniaturized it enough to wrap around a 6-year-old. "Who puts military-grade armor on a child?" Morn asked from the ground, and his voice had lost the casual tone entirely. Drayla answered before Vaelen could. "A species that expects its children to need it." The child looked up at Sorath's approaching team. Vaelen watched the small face on his monitor, searching for the terror that should have been there, the shock, the damage. The child's expression was patient, bored almost, as if orbital bombardment were a weather event, something to wait out, like rain. Vaelen's scales had shed another 8% of their sheen. He could see it on his own forearms now, the silver dulling to a matte gray, and he thought about his academy thesis on proportional military response, and how confidently he had written it, and how young he had been 3 hours ago. "We gave you a choice," the child said. Sorath stopped walking. The audio feed carried only particulate hiss for 4 seconds. "This is the consequence." 6 years old, reciting a sentence that had been taught to it, clearly, rehearsed in the way children rehearse things without understanding them fully, the way Vaelen's own nestlings repeated safety drills. Except this was not a safety drill, and the sentence was not about safety. The adaptive plating pulsed once, a bright charge cycling through every segment simultaneously, and 3 members of Sora's ground team dropped their scanning equipment because their instruments had just registered the pulse as a weapon's discharge. It wasn't. It was the armor resetting, cycling to ready state. The child hadn't activated it. The plating had decided, autonomously, that the threat assessment warranted continued operation. And so it continued operating, wrapped around a 6-year-old who was sitting cross-legged on a piece of foundation eating something from a foil packet that Sorath's camera identified, after Vaelen requested a zoom, as some kind of preserved fruit. Vaelen filed the reclassification request at 15:23 station time. Species, human. Prior classification, Category 3, limited threat. Diplomatic engagement recommended. Revised classification. He stared at the form for 11 minutes. He revised it to Category 7, then revised it again. He settled on Category 9, existential consideration required, and in the additional notes field he wrote 4 words: "They armor their children." The observation deck was quiet, 47 officers processing the same feed, the same data, the same conclusion they had not wanted to reach. Vaelen stood at the cracked viewport, the one with the maintenance tag, the hairline fracture running north-northwest, and through it he could see the planet's surface still hazy with the dust of what they had done. He raised one hand and pressed it flat against the glass. 4 fingers splayed wide, covering the fracture line. On a different viewport, on a different world, in rubble that was still warm, a handprint the size of a human child's palm marked the inside of a broken window. Vaelen did not know this yet. He would learn it from Sorath's secondary footage 3 days later, and when he saw it he would request a leave of absence, citing personal reasons, which was a clinical way of saying he could not stop thinking about the size of that print and what it meant that something so small had survived something so large and had not even seemed surprised. The maintenance tag fluttered once in the vent current and went still.